The Spartacus series begins with Gods of the Arena and introduces Quintus Batiatus, a lanista who has recently inherited his father's ludus where he houses and trains gladiators. Quintus and his wife Lucretia have long desired to climb the political ranks of Capua and earn greater power and wealth, and view their gladiators' glory in the arena as their best chance of achieving their greatest desires. In the hopes of currying favor with the wealthy nobleman Tullius, Batiatus buys one of his working slaves, the savage Gaul Crixus, for 5 times his value. But this does little to earn Tullius's respect, and so Batiatus offers to have his most prized and skilled gladiator Gannicus engage in a fight to the death while blindfolded. Gannicus proves his worth and wins the fight, but Batiatus is left disappointed when instead of being offered a place in the opening games of Tullius's under construction arena, the nobleman instead tries to buy Gannicus for himself. When Batiatus refuses, Tullius and his lanista friend Vettius savagely beat him. Crixus is taken to Batiatus's ludus to train alongside fellow new recruits, the Syrians Ashur and Dagon. Other gladiators include Batiatus's personal bodyguard Barca and Barca's lover Octis. As Crixus trains in the ways of the gladiator, he declares his intentions to one day be known as the greatest champion that the arena has ever seen. Meanwhile, Gannicus is awarded for his victory with wine and women. At Batiatus's villa, Gannicus has forged a brotherly bond with Oenomaus, a highly revered gladiator champion who was still recovering from serious injuries inflicted upon him during his last fight. Despite wanting to reclaim his former glory in the arena, Batiatus instead promotes Oenomaus to the role of Doctore, training his fellow gladiators to achieve their own glory as champions. Oenomaus finds comfort in his wife Melita, the personal slave of Lucretia, and alongside Gannicus, the trio care for each other as a found family. Elsewhere, Lucretia's old friend Gaia arrives in Capua, recently widowed and searching for a new wealthy husband. Gaia introduces Lucretia to opium, soon leading to debaucherous drug-fueled sex parties between Gaia, Lucretia, and Batiatus. Meanwhile, Batiatus commiserates with his friend and fellow aspiring lanista Salonius, and the pair conspire to achieve glory in spite of Tullius's resistance. Batiatus sends Ashur and Dagon to attack Vettius and slaughter his slaves as revenge for his own beating, granting the Syrians the official mark of brotherhood for their success. This draws the ire of the other gladiators, who pay the Syrians little respect for not earning their mark in the sands of the arena. When Ashur and Dagon compete in their first true gladiator fight, Dagon proves his prowess, but Ashur is defeated and nearly killed before Dagon intervenes to save him. Despite this embarrassment, Ashur claims the victory as his own and insists that he has earned his mark of brotherhood, all while growing bitter at Dagon for his successes. This eventually leads to a training fight between the pair where Ashur plays dirty and slices out Dagon's eye. Batiatus next attempts to woo the Roman senator Quintilius Varus to claim a spot in the opening primus despite Tullius's resistance. At the house of Batiatus, Varus is impressed by Gannicus's fighting and sadistically requests to see if the gladiator is similarly skilled at having sex. And so Gannicus is forced into having sex with Melita for Varus's entertainment. Gannicus and Melita feel great shame over this act, though they both realize their true romantic feelings for each other, and so they agree to keep this a secret from Oenomaus. Ultimately, Varus is so impressed by Gannicus that he officially offers him a spot in the primus. Batiatus celebrates his success with copious wine, drugs, and sex alongside Lucretia and Gaia, before being embarrassingly confronted by the sudden return of his father Titus, who admonishes his son for turning their family home into disarray. Titus also shames Batiatus for his foolish plan to use Gannicus in the primus to achieve glory for their family name, and forces Batiatus to make amends with Tullius by staging a fight to the death between his own gladiators, Crixus and Octis. During the fight, Crixus represents the new methods that Batiatus has instated at the ludus, while the seasoned Octis represents the old ways of Titus. Ultimately, Crixus wins the fight and kills Octis, much to Barca's devastation. As Crixus is officially granted the mark of brotherhood, Titus acknowledges that he underestimated his son, but has now had his love of the arena reignited, taking back control of the ludus from a bitter Batiatus. Meanwhile, Varus spreads words of the debaucherous fun of House Batiatus, prompting Quintus to take his father for a night out to allow Lucretia to host a wild party for more wealthy and influential Romans. Even Tullius arrives to take part in the night of debauchery, though this is part of his ruse to murder Gaia as a threatening sign to Batiatus. Titus is enraged when he discovers the aftermath of the party, covering up Gaia's death and demanding that Batiatus divorce Lucretia for her depravity. Solonius offers to marry and provide for Lucretia in his stead, while a frustrated Batiatus admits to Lucretia his disappointment that she has yet to birth him a son. Desperate to appease her husband, Lucretia begins sleeping with Crixus, having heard tales of the fertility of Gauls. Unaware of this act, Batiatus affirms to Lucretia that he chooses her and makes plans to leave the ludus. Back in control of his ludus, Titus holds a tournament amongst his gladiators to determine House Batiatus' greatest champion. During the final fight of the tournament between Gannicus and Crixus, Oenomaus warns his friend of Titus's intentions to sell him to Tullius should he lose. But Gannicus has fallen hopelessly in love with Melita, and wanting to protect his heart and spare Oenomaus a betrayal, Gannicus purposefully loses the fight to ensure his permanent departure from the House of Batiatus. Before Gannicus takes his leave, he is visited by Melita, who professes her mutual love for him. She drinks wine stolen from Titus to bid him a final farewell, but Gannicus chooses to remain sober. Meanwhile, Titus discovers that his wine has been poisoned by Lucretia and collapses dead. As Lucretia takes in her villainous act, having secured her husband control of his ludus once again, a heartbroken Gannicus arrives with the dead Melita, leaving Lucretia distraught over accidentally killing her beloved house slave. Oenomaus is comforted by Gannicus as he mourns Melita, unaware that his best friend had had an affair with his late wife. Lucretia hides from her husband her involvement in his father's death, and instead frames Tullius, prompting Batiatus to conspire revenge. Believing Tullius to be responsible for Titus and Melita's deaths, Batiatus, Gannicus, and Oenomaus confront and brutally murder him before burying him beneath his own arena. Solonius then forces Vettius to help cover up this act, but then betrays his friend Batiatus by claiming all of Vettius' gladiators for himself. As the season comes to a close, the opening primus begins at the newly finished arena, where the gladiators of Batiatus and Solonius face off. All of the fighters are placed in the center of the arena and surrounded by a ring of fire, where they will fight to their death or until they are forced out of the ring, leaving only one man left standing to be crowned champion. Ashur and Dagon use this opportunity to take their grievances out on one another, ultimately leading to Ashur killing Dagon. When Ashur tries to convince Crixus to align with him to defeat Gannicus, Crixus instead brutally cripples Ashur's leg and knocks him out of the arena, leaving himself and Gannicus to fight Solonius' greatest gladiator, Cabarrus. As Cabarrus swings a killing blow toward Crixus, Gannicus intervenes and knocks his ally out of the ring, then lands a killing blow on his giant opponent. The crowd erupts in celebration over Gannicus' victory, leading to the scheming Solonius to suggest that Batiatus grant Gannicus his freedom. Wanting to appease the crowd, the bitter Batiatus relents. In the end, Gannicus bids farewell to his fellow gladiators. Oenomaus gives Gannicus a rudis, a symbol of his freedom, before the two men part as brothers. Crixus laments over never getting a chance to prove himself in a fair fight against Gannicus, but Gannicus encourages Crixus to become a champion in the arena to earn his freedom and seek him out for a fight as free men. You know, these gladiators might have been known as the gods of the arena, but you could be known as the god of your own arena thanks to this video sponsor, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve is America's favorite adult store, and they've been in business for over 50 years. And in that time, they've satisfied over 20 million customers. Plus, they've got discreet shipping, 24/7 customer service, and a 90-day no-hassle return policy. So head on over to adamandeve.com/recap and use promo code RECAP at checkout for 50% off one item plus free shipping. Thanks again to Adam and Eve for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the recap. The story continues 5 years later in Spartacus, Blood and Sand. As Rome goes to war against its enemies, a faction led by the legatus Claudius Glaber forges an alliance with the Thracian, agreeing that in exchange for the assistance of the Thracian villagers in battle, the Romans will assist in staving off barbarians invading their homeland. But in the Thracians' greatest hour of need, Glaber orders them to instead aid the Roman army. The Thracian leader rallies his men to abandon the Romans and save their village, reuniting with his wife Sura in the process. In turn, Glaber suffers a humiliating defeat, and as revenge sends Sura into slavery and captures the Thracian for execution in the now completed gladiator arena. But as the Thracian fights against seasoned gladiators, he is inspired by the love of his wife to survive and and somehow set her free. The Colosseum cheers in support of the Thracian, infuriating Glaber, who wants to see the man dead. Instead, the Thracian's life is spared and he is sold to train as a gladiator at the house of Batiatus, where he is given the name Spartacus after a renowned Thracian king. In the past 5 years, Batiatus has struggled to raise his status and gain political power, and a recent drought has left him in severe debt. Batiatus is also constantly undermined by his rival Salonius, whose cunning charisma better woos the political leaders of Rome. And so Batiatus now sees an alliance with Glaber as his best opportunity to reverse his fortunes. Glaber wants Spartacus dead, and Batiatus assures him that Spartacus will not survive future gladiatorial games. As Batiatus tries to impress Glaber, Lucretia bonds with Legatus's wife Ilithyia, the daughter of the powerful senator Albinius. Lucretia has also continued her sexual exploits with Crixus, which have grown into an obsession, despite Crixus's own secret love affair with Lucretia's new house slave Naevia. As Spartacus arrives at Batiatus's ludus, he is greeted with derision from the other gladiators. Oenomaus has grown into a strict though highly respected doctore. Crixus has become a star champion amongst the gladiators of House Batiatus, turning him cocky and prideful. Barca is now in a relationship with the young and naive Pietros. Ashur has gained new responsibilities and privileges as Batiatus's lapdog, performing any task required of him, no matter how treacherous. This has earned him the contempt of the other gladiators, who Ashur longs to be accepted by, though his still crippled leg makes his return to the arena seem impossible. Spartacus's only friend in the ludus is fellow new recruit Varro, who chose to become a gladiator in the hopes of paying off his gambling debts and reuniting with his wife Aurelia and their young son Janus. To encourage Spartacus to use his fighting skills for the advancement of his house, Batiatus vows to find Sura and reunite the husband and wife. During the trial for the recruits to earn their marks of brotherhood, Spartacus fights Crixus and uses his love for Sura as inspiration to defeat the Gaul, then pledges his loyalty to his dominus Batiatus. In Spartacus's desperation to free Sura, he manipulates his way into facing Crixus in the gladiator arena, but Crixus is a far more seasoned fighter and easily defeats Spartacus. Spartacus asks for mercy, sparing his life, but the crowd no longer favors him. Batiatus is infuriated by Spartacus's failures and forces him to compete in the seedy underground fighting pits in the hopes of recouping his losses. During the fights, Batiatus is attacked by slaves, whom Spartacus kills, earning the trust of his dominus. Batiatus then tasks Ashur and Barca with uncovering the slave's owner so he can seek revenge. They discover that the assassination attempt was orchestrated by Avidius, a merchant to whom Batiatus owes a large sum of money. Batiatus attacks Avidius in his villa, and the merchant reveals that Salonius had paid him to seek deadly retribution. The bitter Batiatus has Barca slaughter Avidius and his family, then burn their villa to the ground. The influential magistrate Calavius hires gladiators from House Batiatus to compete in games to honor the gods and ask for rainfall to end Capua's drought. Salonius hires the retired and undefeated gladiator Theocles to fight against the duo of Crixus and Spartacus, hoping to kill off Batiatus's most prized fighters and ruin his ludus. During the fight, Spartacus struggles working with Crixus to defeat Theocles, as the Gaul wants all of the glory for himself. Eventually, due to their division, Theocles critically injures Crixus. While reeling from his mortal wounds, Crixus helps distract Theocles to allow Spartacus to finally kill him. As the crowd cheers, rain finally falls upon the arena, and Spartacus is hailed with glory as the new champion of Capua and bringer of rain. Batiatus is thrilled over Spartacus's popularity and believes he finally has the perfect tool to achieve his social ascent. As a reward, Batiatus tracks down Sura and plans to reunite her with Spartacus in the villa. Lucretia warns that Spartacus only fights as well as he does out of his desire to reunite with his wife, and fears that he will no longer have the will upon their happy reunion. When Sura arrives at the villa, Spartacus is devastated to discover that her transport was attacked en route, leading to her dying in the arms of her heartbroken husband. Batiatus confides in Lucretia that he had technically kept his promise to reunite Spartacus with his wife, but secretly had her killed to exploit Spartacus's quest for vengeance for his own favor. Inspired by Sura's belief in the gods' plans for her husband, Spartacus assumes his role as a gladiator champion, fighting for his survival until he can achieve his destiny. Meanwhile, Ashur owes Barca a large sum of money after losing a bet about the Theocles fight, and has no way of paying, while Barca intends on using his winnings to purchase his and Pietros's freedom. And so Ashur tricks Batiatus into believing that Barca had spared the life of Avidius's son, who could incriminate the house of Batiatus. Despite Barca's objections, Batiatus chooses to believe Ashur's lies and kills Barca himself. Ashur spreads the lie that Barca bought his freedom and abandoned Pietros, leading to the young lover succumbing to his own grief. With Spartacus's continued success in the arena, Batiatus buys more slaves to turn into gladiators, including the Gauls Segovax and the brothers Agron and Duro. Throughout training, Agron grows frustrated with his brother for showing cowardice while fighting, pressuring Duro to stand up for himself. With Crixus slow in his recovery following the Theocles fight, Batiatus considers selling him, much to Lucretia's dismay. Secretly, Ilithia tasks Segovax to murder Spartacus, promising his freedom in return. Instead, Crixus intervenes to save Spartacus, re-earning Batiatus' respect and loyalty. Ilithia then introduces Lucretia to her friend Licenia, who has developed a sexual interest in the gladiators. Lucretia arranges for her to sleep with Spartacus, but fears for his performance due to his grief over Sura. And so Batiatus and Lucretia task their slave Mira to help the resistant Spartacus practice. Spartacus rebuffs Mira's sexual advances, but they forge a genuine friendship. Ilithia also laments that with her husband Glaber off to war, she has grown lonely and asks for the company of Crixus. This infuriates Lucretia, believing that Ilithia chose Crixus to purposefully antagonize her. The masked Spartacus is then taken to sleep with the masked Licenia, but after their act is finished, Lucretia arrives with the real Licenia. Spartacus realizes that he had just had sex with Ilithia, the wife of his most bitter foe Glaber. As Licenia taunts the manipulated Ilithia, Glaber's wife snaps and murders her friend. Lucretia comforts the horrified Ilithia and invites her to live at the villa, drawing her, and by extension Glaber, closer to House Batiatus. Calavius' teenage son Numerius becomes obsessed with gladiator fighting, and Spartacus teaches him some fighting techniques, further impressing the magistrate toward Batiatus. Batiatus then throws a birthday celebration for Numerius at the villa, giving him full access to the gladiators as his own personal playthings. Ilithia plots her revenge against Batiatus and Lucretia by seducing the young Numerius to enact her bidding. And so, as Spartacus defeats his friend Varro in a playful exhibition match, the crowd is shocked when Numerius abruptly calls for the loser to be put to death. Knowing Spartacus would also be killed for not following orders, Varro asks his friend to look after his family, then forces the heartbroken Spartacus to kill him. A heartbroken Aurelia refuses any financial support from Spartacus and instead chooses to serve as a debt slave to House Batiatus. Following the party, Batiatus asks for Calavius' support in running for the Roman Senate, but the magistrate turns him down, not believing he suits politics. A bitter Batiatus seeks vengeance by capturing and torturing Calavius. He then tasks Ashur with tricking Salonius to race to the sewers to save Calavius, but instead Salonius finds the magistrate already dead. Batiatus and Ashur arrive with Roman soldiers to arrest the framed Salonius for Calavius' murder, after which the innocent Salonius is executed in the arena by Spartacus. For Ashur's help in defeating Salonius, Batiatus grants him a permanent room inside the main villa and a night with the slave of his choosing, Naevia. Ashur then goads Crixus into a public fight after exposing the gladiator's secret love affair with Naevia. Lucretia is devastated that Crixus loves another, and as revenge, sells off Naevia to another villa. Crixus is heartbroken and vows to earn his freedom to find and save his beloved. As she departs, Naevia also reveals to Oenomaus her knowledge of Barca's true fate, prompting the Doctore to finally question his loyalty to House Batiatus. When Glaber returns to Capua after an extended military operation, Batiatus reveals that Ilithia had killed Licenia, blackmailing the legatus into giving his patronage to House Batiatus. Viewing his ascent to political power as imminent, Batiatus promises to name Oenomaus as a free man and make him the Lanista of the Ludus. As the season comes to a close, Spartacus finally discovers Batiatus' hand hand in Sura's death. And so Spartacus begins trying to rally all of the gladiators to join him in killing Batiatus and his guards and flee the ludus forever. Only the brothers Agron and Duro support him, with the other gladiators viewing Crixus as their leader. Spartacus also tasked Mira with bringing the house slaves to his cause, which she agrees to do on the condition that he try to love her with even a shadow of the love that he had for Sura. Spartacus tells Crixus about Batiatus killing Sura and warns that he could do the same to Naevia, but Crixus affirms his intention to win his freedom in the arena so that he and Naevia won't spend their lives hunted as escaped slaves. To celebrate his recent successes, Batiatus holds a fight to the death at his villa between his most prized gladiators, Spartacus and Crixus. While a group of wealthy elites watch the fight, Crixus begins to weaken, as he had been poisoned by the bitter Lucretia to ensure his defeat. Spartacus warns Crixus of this treachery, finally winning the Gaul to his cause. Crixus helps Spartacus leap out of the arena to attack Batiatus, while Crixus unites all of the gladiators to storm the villa and kill all of the Romans. Amidst the chaos, Duro courageously sacrifices himself to save his brother Agron. Oenomaus finds Ashur, rebukes his history of dishonor, and then forces him to engage in a fight to the death. But Ashur proves he never had the makings of a true gladiator, and instead runs away and hides. Lucretia asks for Ilithyia to order her personal guards to help protect the house of Batiatus, but Ilithyia instead abandons her conniving former friend and seals the exit doors in an act of revenge. Aurelia brutally murders the young Numerius for ordering the death of her husband Varro. Crixus finds and corners Lucretia, demanding to know where Naevia had been sent. Lucretia refuses to answer, instead revealing that she had become pregnant with his child. The vengeful Crixus stabs Lucretia in the stomach, killing their unborn child and leaving her to bleed out. As Batiatus finds his dying wife, he is confronted by Spartacus, who finally achieves vengeance by killing his slave master. In the end, Spartacus announces that all of the gladiators and slaves of House Batiatus are now free to do what they want with their lives. But if they choose to, they can join him to liberate all of the slaves oppressed throughout Rome. The story continues in Spartacus' vengeance. Several weeks have passed and the freed gladiators and slaves of House Batiatus are living in hiding. Spartacus and Crixus have come at odds over how to best shepherd their people, with Spartacus wanting to take immediate action against Glaber, while Crixus desires to find and rescue Naevia. Oenomaus abandons his allies from House Batiatus, feeling remorse for his part in the vicious slaughter, though warning that by provoking Glaber, the freed slaves would incur the wrath of the entire Roman army. Elsewhere, Glaber is now a praetor in the Roman Senate, with the now pregnant Ilithyia by his side. Unfortunately, Ilithia's father, Senator Albinius, demands that Glaber be tasked with killing Spartacus and bring a swift end to his burgeoning slave rebellion. And so Glaber and Ilithyia return to Capua and set up residence in the fallen house of Batiatus, where they are shocked to discover that Lucretia is still alive, though has been driven mad from the trauma of the massacre and her several weeks of solitary isolation. The citizens of Capua believe Lucretia's survival to be an act of the gods, and that she is an oracle, forcing Glaber to care for her and use her as a prop for his political and military movements. When Spartacus stages an independent public attack against Glaber, he discovers that Aurelia has been captured and mortally wounded. As Spartacus becomes overwhelmed by Roman forces, Crixus arrives with his loyal gladiators to save Spartacus, who mourns Aurelia's death and realizes that his reckless actions will ruin the rebellion. And so Spartacus agrees to accompany Crixus in search of Naevia, and on their journey they will liberate and train captured slaves throughout Rome to build their own rebel army. With this act, Spartacus and Crixus have officially forged a bond that turns them from rivals of the arena to brothers of the rebellion. On their quest, the rebels find the villa to which Naevia was originally sold. Crixus kills the Dominus when he fails to remember where Naevia had been sold off to next, while Spartacus liberates the villa slaves to join his cause. One of those slaves, Nasir, is bitter over having lost his standing with his Dominus, and resents Spartacus for turning him into a lowly and vulnerable fugitive and attempts to assassinate him. But Spartacus shows mercy upon Nasir, and instead offers to train him to fight for not only himself, but for a better future for slaves across Rome. As Nasir becomes a skilled fighter and proves his newfound loyalty to the rebels, he also develops a romantic bond with Agron. Agron has grown frustrated with the seemingly hopeless mission to rescue Naevia, and resents Crixus for distracting Spartacus from violent vengeance. When Agron learns from a dying slaver that Naevia is alive and enduring grueling labor at the mines, he chooses to lie, telling Crixus she is dead in the hopes of ending this distraction to the slave rebellion. Nasir reveals the truth to Crixus, creating a fierce rivalry between the Gaul and Agron. As Spartacus and his rebel army accompany Crixus to the mines, a bitter Agron rallies a small group of supporters to continue on with their revenge mission. Elsewhere, as Glaber remains focused on his mission, he begins to neglect his wife Ilithyia, and so Ilithyia seeks the aid of her father Senator Albinius to dissolve her marriage so that she can instead marry the younger and more powerful Senator Verinius. As Lucretia continues to claim new divine oracle powers from the gods, Glaber grows impatient and suspicious. Lucretia defies his skepticism when Ashur arrives at the villa with a captured Oenomaus, seemingly proving the god's favor of Lucretia. Secretly, this was all a part of a ruse devised by Lucretia and Ashur, working together to elevate their standings in the eyes of the Roman elites. Ashur tortures Oenomaus for information on where Spartacus and his army are heading. When Oenomaus refuses to cooperate, Ashur finally reveals the truth of Gannicus's affair with Melita, manipulating the heartbroken Oenomaus into accidentally revealing Crixus's quest to find and save Naevia. Ashur accompanies Glaber and his soldiers to the mines where they confront the rebel army. Crixus manages to briefly reunite with Naevia before sending her off with Spartacus, while he stays behind to distract the Romans and ensure her safe escape. As Spartacus and his surviving allies flee, they become overwhelmed by the pursuing Roman forces, though are saved by the return of Agron and his men. The rebel group finds shelter near Mount Vesuvius in the home of Lucius, a Roman citizen disillusioned with the callous actions of the Senate. When Lucius informs Spartacus of the news that the captured Crixus and Oenomaus will be put to death in the arena, Spartacus devises a plan to rescue his friends. As crowds gather in Capua to watch the executions of the former gladiator champions, the free Gannicus returns to voluntarily act as executioner on behalf of Rome, believing the most honorable death for his old friend Oenomaus is to die by his sword. As Glaber anticipates this act, Lucretia exposes Ilithyia's plans to divorce him, sending the praetor into a rage. As the gladiatorial games begin, Mira sets fire to the arena's foundation, setting the entire structure on the verge of collapse. As the fight begins, Oenomaus and Gannicus reunite for the first time on the battlefield, where Oenomaus savagely attacks his old friend for his betrayal. But before the fight can come to a deadly end, the arena begins to collapse and the entire crowd devolves into chaos as they try to escape the destruction. Spartacus and Agron use this as a distraction to lead the rebels into the arena, killing all of the guards to allow Crixus, Oenomaus, and Gannicus to successfully escape. As Glaber flees the wreckage, he finds Albinius trapped beneath a collapsed column, begging for help. Instead, Glaber coldly kills his father-in-law, telling his heartbroken wife that despite their lack of love for each other, she is now forced to remain his wife and birth his heir. Following the rebels' success in the arena, Glaber tasks Ashur to form a group of savage former gladiators to aid the Romans in their hunt for Spartacus. Feeling emboldened by the power and respect he is receiving from Glaber, Ashur turns on Lucretia and subjugates her to his bidding, flipping their former master and slave dynamic. When Glaber seeks an alliance with the powerful noble Seppius but is turned down, he tasks Ashur's new army to slaughter Seppius and everyone in his villa, blaming the act on escaped slaves who joined Spartacus's rebellion. Seppius' sister Seppia seeks comfort from Glaber, leading to the two engaging in an affair. Saved from the Romans, Crixus and Naevia are emotionally reunited, though their romance is strained due to the trauma that Naevia has been forced to endure. And so Crixus begins training Naevia in the ways of the gladiator, turning her into a highly skilled warrior and helping her regain confidence in herself and their relationship. Meanwhile, Mira has fallen in love with Spartacus, despite knowing that he will never be able to love her in the way that he loved his wife. Gannicus contemplates abandoning the rebel army to return to his simple life of freedom, but after realizing that the violent Roman oppression knows no limits, limits, he instead returns to Spartacus's side, bringing a kidnapped Ilithyia with him as a hostage. Ilithyia reveals that she is pregnant with Spartacus's baby and begs for her life, while Spartacus assures her that her husband Glaber is the true villain. Glaber is then sent Spartacus's terms, a cache of weapons and armor in exchange for Ilithia's safe return. But when Spartacus and his army arrive for the exchange, Glaber reveals his betrayal, instead tasking Ashur's gladiators to slaughter the rebels. Spartacus and his allies manage to escape, though Lucius is killed in the battle. Despite this, Spartacus decides to release Ilithyia, confirming that her husband had no intention of ever saving her. Ilithyia returns home to discover that she has been fully replaced at Glaber's side by the young and naive Sepia. While still forced into a sexual relationship with Ashur, Lucretia discovers proof of his and Glaber's involvement in Sepius's death. With this revelation, Lucretia and Ilithyia manipulate Sepia into attempting to assassinate Glaber. But at the very last moment, Ilithyia intervenes and kills the young woman, saving her husband's life. With this act, Glaber and Ilithyia come to a mutual understanding of their marriage as equals in their shared quest for power. Elsewhere, Spartacus leads his army to Neapolis, where they liberate a shipment of Germanic slaves and bolster their ranks. This concerns Crixus, who fears that the German Agron will assume control of the new, more violent rebels and be at odds with Spartacus's leadership. When one of the Germans assaults Naevia, she kills him in self-defense, and Agron affirms to Spartacus his loyalty and intention to keep his people in line. With Lucius dead, Ashur helps Glaber deduce that the rebels are living in his villa in Vesuvius. As they prepare to strike, Glaber promises to give Ashur control of the former house of Batiatus Ludus and Lucretia as his new bride if Spartacus is finally defeated. The Roman forces assault Lucius's temple, and though the rebels fight with a skilled and united front, they are severely outmanned. After suffering countless losses, Spartacus calls for a retreat, with their only path to safety being the top of Mount Vesuvius. Glaber orders his forces to besiege the mountain, knowing it would only be a matter of time before the rebels begin to starve. As tensions grow amongst the rebels trapped atop Mount Vesuvius, the German Nemetes leads a faction of frustrated rebels to attack the awaiting Romans, but they are quickly overwhelmed. Spartacus rallies a group to save Nemetes, but in the battle, the loyal Mira is struck down and killed. Lucretia and Ilithyia then trick Glaber into believing that Ashur had taken part in Sepia's failed assassination plot. To prove his loyalty, Ashur is sent alone to the rebel camp to relay terms of surrender. If Spartacus sacrifices himself, the other rebels will be spared, though enslaved once again. The rebels refuse these terms, but instead of allowing Ashur to return to the Romans, Naevia demands that she be allowed to engage her former tormentor in a fight to the death. Using all of the skills that her lover Crixus has imparted on her, Naevia ultimately kills and defeats the conniving Ashur. With Ashur dead, Glaber tells Ilithyia that they no longer have any use for Lucretia, and for the wife to fully regain the trust of her husband, she must kill her friend. But as Ilithyia is about to kill Lucretia, her water breaks. The mentally broken Lucretia decides to cut the baby out of Ilithyia, killing her and claiming the child as her own, then takes it to join her husband Batiatus in the afterlife. As this season comes to a close, Spartacus devises a plan to assault Glaber's unsuspecting forces from two sides. During the battle, Gannicus and Oenomaus fight side by side against Ashur's savage Egyptian brute. Though Gannicus manages to kill the gladiator, Oenomaus is mortally wounded. As the former Doctore dies, he finds comfort in being reunited with Melita, and vows to reunite with Gannicus in the afterlife as brothers. Spartacus meets Glaber on the battlefield, where the two bitter rivals engage in their own fight to the death. Ultimately, Spartacus kills Glaber, finally finding vengeance for the death of Sura. In the end, Spartacus realizes that more Romans will be sent to defeat the rebels, but he rallies his victorious army, vowing to ensure that all of their enemies follow Glaber in death. The story continues in Spartacus, War of the Damned. 1 year has passed and the rebel army has grown massively in size. Spartacus leads the rebels alongside his trusted commanders Crixus and Agron, defeating legions of the Roman army in several hard-fought battles. With winter approaching, Spartacus realizes his army will need to take control of an entire city to house and feed their expanding ranks. And so the rebels fight for control of Sinuessa, which they believe will be defensible from Roman attacks. Amidst this takeover, the rebels are raided by Gannicus's blacksmith friend from Sinuessa, Addius, while all of the surviving citizens are taken hostage. One of the hostage Romans is Leda, whose husband is killed by Spartacus for failing to cooperate. Many of the rebels, like Nemetes, want to kill the unarmed civilians, but Spartacus keeps them alive, wanting to show greater mercy to the Romans than the Romans ever showed the slaves. Crixus and Naevia grow more callous toward the Romans and force them into fighting to the death for mere scraps of food. Gannicus remains a skilled fighter and loyal soldier in Spartacus's rebel army, but refuses the responsibility of being a lead commander. Instead, he enjoys the spoils of war alongside his new lover, the German warrior Saxa. One of the freed slaves from Sinuessa, Sybil, takes a romantic interest in Gannicus after watching him murder her master, but Gannicus rebuffs her advances, believing her to be too young and naive for the harsh realities of the rebellion. Meanwhile, the wealthy senator Marcus Crassus is placed as the new commander of the Roman army and tasked with bringing down Spartacus and his rebels. Crassus' son Tiberius is frustrated that his father didn't negotiate a worthy reward in the event of his victory, but Crassus believes that the glory he will receive upon killing Spartacus will be enough to advance his political and social machinations. Tiberius grows more resentful when Crassus passes over him and instead names the esteemed Julius Caesar as his second in command. Caesar is a highly skilled warrior who has fallen into debt and is looking to regain his family's prominence and begin his political career. As Crassus devotes his full attention to defeating Spartacus, he is also in a secret love affair with his house slave Kore. The rebels begin running low on food and strike a deal with a pirate gang led by Heraclio for supplies. Spartacus frees the hostage Leda and tasks her with ensuring that her people are fed and well cared for. Meanwhile, one of the pirates, Castus, takes a romantic interest in Nasir, drawing the jealous ire of Agron. As the rebels and the pirates meet for a trade, Tiberius catches them in the act. Despite being ordered to only observe, the ambitious Tiberius instead orders his men to attack. Ultimately, the rebels and pirates unite to defeat the Romans, forcing an embarrassed and injured Tiberius to retreat in shame. Crassus is enraged by Tiberius disobeying his orders and suffering an embarrassing loss, and so to punish Tiberius and his regiment, Crassus makes them all draw lots, with 5 unfortunate soldiers being put to death. One of those soldiers is Tiberius' best friend, driving the son to resent his father. In an act of petty revenge, Tiberius assaults his father's slave lover, Kore. Meanwhile, Naevia grows more violently vengeful toward the Romans, and upon learning that some of the captives have escaped, she places blame on the blacksmith Addius and brutally murders him. Secretly, it is Leda who is aiding in the escape of the tormented captives, hoping to free them from the violent persecution of the rebels. As winter draws nearer, escaped slaves from across Rome arrive in Sinuessa to seek refuge. Julius Caesar disguises himself as a slave to infiltrate the rebel city and stoke division. Caesar befriends the German Nemetes, convincing him to rally like-minded rebels to disobey Spartacus's orders and kill all of the defenseless Roman captives. Crixus first tries to calm the dissenters, but when Naevia supports the call for blood, the Gaul ultimately relents and joins in on the merciless Roman slaughter. Crixus demands that Spartacus kill Leda to prove his loyalty to the rebels, but Spartacus instead disavows Crixus and affirms his intention to spare the Romans and ensure that the rebels do not succumb to the same treachery as their former masters. As Crassus' army nears Sinuessa, Spartacus releases Leda and the surviving Roman captives, much to Crixus' dismay. With the rebel forces more fractured than ever, Caesar reveals the true extent of his villainy, killing Nemetes and opening Sinuessa's gates to Crassus' approaching army. To make matters even worse, Heraclio reveals that he and his pirates have been paid off by the Romans, attacking the rebels from the port. As Spartacus becomes overwhelmed by Roman forces, Crixus intervenes to save him, proving that despite their differences, they remain brothers. Amidst the bloody chaos, Castus comes to Nasir's aid, swearing he had no knowledge of Heraclio's betrayal. Ultimately, the rebel army is forced to abandon Sinuessa and flee to the impassable Melia Ridge, while Gannicus stays behind to distract the Romans. Following the Roman reclamation of Sinuessa, Crassus celebrates his victory and gives Heraclio ownership of Lydda as reward for his loyalty. Lydda is shocked and distraught by this act, as Crassus has just sold a free woman into slavery. Meanwhile, while evading capture in Sinuessa, Gannicus finds and rescues Sybil. As the pair flee the city, they come across Heraclio branding Lydda as his slave. As the group engages in a fight, Lydda kills Heraclio and officially joins Gannicus and Sybil to reunite with the rebels. Unfortunately, Spartacus reveals to Gannicus that the Romans have dug a giant trench around the area, trapping the rebels between the trench and the ridge, leaving them defenseless from imminent attack. Tensions grow as the rebel leaders struggle to figure out the best plan of action. Crixus wants to confront the Romans head-on, which Spartacus sees as certain death, leading to the men coming to physical blows. With a blizzard approaching and the Roman army at their heels, Gannicus and Sybil seek romantic comfort in each other, while Spartacus and Lydda profess their mutual affection. Upon the blizzard's passing, Spartacus discovers that 1,000 of his people have died in the storm. While mourning their loss, Spartacus decides to use their bodies as a bridge to cross the Roman-made trench and lead his people to freedom. As the rebels flee Melia Ridge, Spartacus and Crixus realize that they must part ways for good, though their bond of brotherhood remains intact. Crixus will lead an army of willing rebel fighters to attack Rome directly, while Spartacus will lead the others, consisting of mostly untrained civilians, to freedom outside of Rome's grasp. Naevia joins Crixus, hoping to achieve a permanent peace throughout Rome in which they can raise a family together. Agron chooses to accompany Crixus, sharing an emotional goodbye with Nasir and trusting Castus to protect him. Gannicus considers joining Crixus as the two men have grown to become great allies following their original rivalry, but ultimately decides to remain by Spartacus's side to protect those in need, like his new lover Sybil. Elsewhere, Courtney attempts to tell Crassus about Tiberius assaulting her, but before she can, Crassus proclaims his decision to forgive his son for all of his past failures and elevate him to second in command. And so, Courtney keeps the secret to herself and instead chooses to flee to the rebel camp. Furious at being demoted despite his successes, Caesar threatens Tiberius to tell Crassus of his treachery, but instead, the conniving Tiberius dominates and assaults Caesar to keep him in line. When Crassus gets word of Spartacus and Crixus' diverging armies, he struggles with whether to send his army to protect Rome or continue their pursuit of Spartacus. Ultimately, Crassus' forces arrive in Rome, overwhelming and defeating Crixus' army. Crixus defeats Caesar, but before landing a killing blow, Tiberius sneaks up behind him and fatally stabs the unsuspecting Gaul. Crassus begins crucifying Agron and the few other rebel survivors, then sends Naevia back to Spartacus with Crixus' head as a sign of their inevitable defeat. As retribution, Spartacus lures out the unsuspecting Tiberius and several of his fellow soldiers, capturing them and forcing them to compete in their own gladiator fights to the death. Naevia faces off against Tiberius in a fight to avenge her lover Crixus, but before she can strike a killing blow, Caesar arrives at the rebel camp, offering a trade of the survivors of Crixus' army in exchange for Tiberius' release. Naevia relents, sparing Tiberius' life to save her allies from certain death. But as Tiberius leaves, the vengeful Courtney emerges to murder him, then takes his place to return by Crassus' side in exchange for the rebel hostages. At the Roman camp, Courtney reveals to Crassus the truth of Tiberius' assault of her and her own hand in Tiberius' death. Crassus blames his own failings as a father for Tiberius' actions and apologizes to Courtney for all that she has suffered. Meanwhile, at the rebel camp, the newly freed Agron emotionally reunites with Nasir. As the rebels mourn their losses, Spartacus rallies them all to honor the dead in one final fight against the Romans to ensure the freedom of the defenseless civilians amongst them. Before embarking on their final fight, Nasir builds Agron a sword and shield weapon that he can wield, with his hands injured from crucifixion. Gannicus bids a heartfelt farewell to Sybil as she joins Lydda and the other civilians to freedom across the mountain pass. Spartacus then meets with Crassus for the first time, where they proclaim that despite their different pasts and ideals, they share a mutual respect for each other as soldiers. As the final battle begins between the massive Roman army and the remainders of the rebels, Crassus callously calls for ballista strikes against his enemies, even if it means striking down his own men in the process. This devious plan plan is thwarted when Gannicus leads a separate charge on the Romans' rear to destroy their heavy weaponry. Amidst the bloodshed, Castus is struck down and dies in the arms of Nasir and Agron, while Saxa dies in the arms of her former lover Gannicus. Naevia confronts Caesar on the battlefield, but he manages to overpower and kill her. As Gannicus angrily attacks Caesar, the Roman flees single combat, instead tasking his army to contend with Gannicus in his stead. Despite his best efforts, Gannicus is overpowered by the Romans, and upon his defeat, Caesar returns to knock out the former champion of the arena. Meanwhile, Spartacus and Crassus engage in a fight to the death. The Roman general proves a worthy opponent, but ultimately Spartacus defeats his rival. Unfortunately, before killing Crassus, Roman forces arrive and strike Spartacus down with spears. Agron and Nasir then arrive, killing the Romans and knocking Crassus off a cliff before saving the mortally wounded Spartacus. As the battle comes to a close, the Romans are ultimately victorious. The injured Crassus calls for the crucifixion of all of the surviving rebels, which includes his former lover Corre and the former god of the arena Gannicus, who envisions reuniting with his brother Oenomaus in the afterlife. In the aftermath, the Roman praetor Pompey arrives, taking full credit for Spartacus' defeat. Crassus shamelessly accepts this, much to Caesar's dismay, with Anaya forming a triumvirate between Crassus, Caesar, and Pompey that will shape the future of the entirety of Rome. In the end, Agron and Nasir take Spartacus to the foot of the Alps, across from which permanent freedom for the slaves awaits. As Spartacus succumbs to his wounds, he takes comfort in his reunion with Sura, who will once again call him by his true name. Spartacus then dies a free man, as Agron, Nasir, Lyda, and Sybil depart, knowing that one day Rome will fall, but the legend of Spartacus will live on.